Thank you for coming to our joint meeting of the College Council on Planning and Budget. And welcome to everybody at North County. Can you hear us?
Yes, we're getting situated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There will be a video of this meeting that will be available on Cuesta's website using the Cuesta President's Forum link near the center of the homepage. And we're going to go ahead and get started. First, Dr. Stork will be presenting the budget reduction plan, and then next we will have time for questions and ideas. We have index cards available throughout the room, and questions and ideas will be submitted on the index cards, and they will be collected throughout the meeting. For Tony and Kathleen will be reading the questions here, and Amy will be collecting them at North County and reading them. After Dr. Stork's presentations, the questions, we'll read them and answer them, and then we'll end the meeting with our next steps and our timeline. So, ready?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here again. Seems like this is becoming a common event, is for us to get together and have some really serious conversations about our climate, our conditions, and our future. And that's the way it should be. We should all be in the same room. We should be all hearing the same information. And we should all be able to ask questions and get information that helps us understand what the issues are. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the charge given to me by the Planning and Budget Committee in context to the economic reality that we're facing within the state of California, and then what my recommendations are in terms of how we meet that challenge. Now, obviously, what I'm going to share with you today will be broad strokes, because an impact of this type affects our campus community very deeply. And this would not be the appropriate arena to start talking about specific cases and specific actions without the courtesy, number one, of being able to talk to affected individuals and or their representatives, whether it be faculty or classified, in this context. So you have to understand that particular part of it. So let's take a look at what happened this year. First of all, we began the year with the state giving us a task of reducing our income by $2.6 million, and we went to work on a budget reduction plan, if you recall, last year. And last year we cut over $2 million up front through a combination of about half of operational costs and half in personnel reductions, either not filling open positions, doing a few layoffs, and doing several work year reductions. And then we also went into the year knowing that the state had put into the budget some kind of false hopes of collecting an additional $4 billion in sales and property taxes. And in watching the year unveil, we found that those projections were very overstated, and that if in fact that the realization didn't come to life by December, when the first property tax collection happens, then various triggers would be pulled. And both triggers were pulled. Trigger 1 and Trigger 2, which is about $850,000 that we were informed about that would be reduced from our current budget. And then came the January/February surprise. And that had to do with a combination of two things. The biggest part of this, almost $1.1 million impact, had to do with the state's overprojection of the collection of student fees. Now, if you recall, the budget was built on the fact that the $36 a unit fee had gone into into play on July 1, but there was also projected a secondary fee to go into play on January 1st, and that was moving the fees to $46 a unit. That was built into the governor's projection of the income that we would be able to realize on a local level. And therefore, our budgetary apportionment was based on that projection. Well, the other obvious thing that the governor did not build into the budget is the fact that as the fees go up, more students qualify for the Board of Governors fee waiver. And guess what? Fewer students are paying the fees. And then the legislature stepped in and said, well, January 1st is a crazy time to implement a fee. And we could have all told them that, because by December we would have already enrolled 10,000 students, and then we become a glorified collection agency, chasing down students, putting holds on records, denying them of transcripts, grades, all those levers that we have to make students own up on their student accounts. So as a result, that led into a major shortfall in the state collection. Therefore, we were notified that our apportionment would be reduced by a portion of this $1.1 million. The second part of this February surprise was a more normal one, and that was an overprojection of the collection of property taxes. Well, what's happened to the property values in the state of California over the last couple of years? It's declined. And new assessed valuations have been lowered. Therefore, less property tax being produced. So the combination of the shortfall of fees and the shortfall of property taxes led to this $1.1 million. So in all, we have been shorted during this year that we're in $4.5 million. But we went into the year with a $2.6 million awareness, and we built a budget reduction plan on that, and we also built in, as I shared with you on January 13th, a strategy to meet the Trigger 1 and Trigger 2, which was a combination of voluntary salary reductions by myself and the vice presidents, savings in salaries from unfilled and open positions, and some operational costs, and then we were going to balance out the shortfall, mid-year shortfall with contingency dollars. But that grew beyond what we're facing now. So we will need to get through this year close to $2 million of our contingency money in order to meet this particular challenge. And the impact of that means we have less contingency dollars to help us get through the 12-13 year. So I just wanted to put into context the impact of these continual reductions on what we're going to be faced with next year. All right, so when I started working with the management team and looking at what we were going to do about it, we set forth some principles that I wanted to make sure that I was keeping in mind as we went through this process. One, and this was to honor the commitment by the Planning and Budget Committee from last year, we wanted to, let me get back to this, thank you. We wanted to make sure we were addressing the annual structural and inflationary deficit, because that had to be done first out the gate. You know, what kinds of structural issues do we have that are going to be creating new challenges for us and the need for new resources? And what are the inflationary factors, the cost of goods and services? How do we plan for that? And going into this year, as opposed to last year we went into the budget reduction plan with the blessing of the Planning and Budget Committee not to use any more than 1/3 of the contingency money, which was $1.2 million. The guiding principle this year is we're not planning on using any contingency dollars at this particular time, because we just have to continue to spend down your savings account, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't change the structural issues that we have. The third principle was, you know, the mission of California Community College is to focus our attention on 3 areas: on career technical education, transfer, and basic skills. So we want to make sure that as we continue to adjust and monitor our our academic program and our services that we keep these in mind. We've already dealt with the community programs issue, which falls outside of this circle. And we've made that a self-supporting program through revenue. So it's not a general fund supported program anymore. As we replace positions, we only want to replace those positions that are essential to the delivery of programs and services that support this core. And where possible, we want to implement proportionate reductions in services that directly affect students. And you know, we've taken an action from the Board of Trustees last week to reduce 2 faculty positions, general fund supported faculty positions in DSPS. But we will still be able to provide support service for DSPS students, and we will still be able to provide the required and mandated accommodations for students who qualify for services. So we are reducing the services, but we're reducing it proportionate to the drop in income that the state has given us to support those programs. A big part of this budget reduction plan is based on several reorganizations of functions and resources, looking at how do we eliminate and minimize the duplication of efforts, and how can we create improved efficiency. And we also want to make sure that we're preserving some ability to serve students district-wide. This is not a college plan, this is a district plan. We have several sites, both physical sites and virtual sites, that we provide programs and services. And we have to keep all of that in mind as we continue to work towards developing a support budget for that element. So I'm going to go through these now by cluster in terms of the President's cluster and the 3 Vice Presidents cluster, to give you a view of where and how and the impact of the reductions. In the President's cluster, these are the areas of changes and actions. In my area, it includes a reorganization in marketing and communication, realigning human resources with administrative services so that we can have a more seamless and more cohesive relationship between payroll and personnel services. I'm realigning institutional research from academic affairs to my office. So the institutional research will become an arm of the President's office. You know, we're operating on a data-driven society and a world that we're in, and I need the best and most accurate and up-to-date information that I have to perform the duties of my office. And these particular actions here lead to some personnel layoffs and reductions in management and classified services of $112,000. $112,186. In the administrative services area, these are the changes in actions and areas. Here we are looking at major restructuring and major realignment. So there will be restructuring of in maintenance and grounds, in bookstore, reprographics, telecommunications, computer services, purchasing, accounting, and shipping and receiving. We perform accounting functions throughout the college and campuses. We need to consolidate those and have one accounting function. We purchase in several different locations. We need to consolidate. Telecommunications is no longer a telephone. It's a technological device among many other technological applications. We need to bring that in alignment with what other technology that we're managing. We have resources within computer services that can be better utilized outside of computer services. We have reprographic services that we feel can be operated more efficiently and different. And we have duplication services in the bookstore. A bookstore is an enterprise operation. We have the opportunity to look at other enterprise operations and maybe create a different cluster of programs and services that operate on a fee-based and a revenue-based process. In this case, there's going to be a combination of personnel layoffs, reductions, and additions, because there are, in some cases, places where we need additional help. And so by trimming in one area, we will create new opportunities in another area to meet today's new challenges in the way in which we do work. The total impact of that will be almost $500,000 in reductions of general fund cost, which is the total for administrative services. In academic affairs cluster, here we're looking at restructuring of the faculty service in academic skills. Part of this is predicated on the fact that we have eliminated 2 positions in DSPS. The affected faculty or tenured faculty have a faculty service area rights to academic skills, so we'll be moving faculty into that skills area, which will require a rearrangement of courses and services and the disruption to some current part-time faculty who are teaching classes which will then be supplanted by the rights of the full-time faculty. We'll be looking at how we provide divisional support for faculty and students throughout the district. Is our best configuration, which really was a creation here in the 70s of how we support, is this still the current model that works? And where do we need specialized help? And we're looking at some specialized help in terms of scheduling. Looking at, do we have a master scheduler rather than everybody in the world have a piece of the scheduling activity, or do we centralize it? How do we provide proper support for the performing arts and the use of our wonderful facility, which has great potential to be not only an instructional facility, which it certainly is, but also a community facility, which has an opportunity to become a revenue generating operation for us. So how do we provide support for that? And just as we implemented the Student Success Center on this campus, now with the Schwartz building open in the North County campus, we have the opportunity to implement the same model at the North County campus and therefore create some restructuring and organization in that area. The total impact of that will it be $317,839. And then finally in student services cluster, there are not too many areas that will not be touched within student services. We've already talked a little bit about the restructuring of DSPS and what that will look like. We'll also be doing some restructuring in the other service areas in financial aid, admissions and records, counseling services, student life and leadership, and a pretty significant administrative reorganization and structure in student services as a whole. So that will also create some deletions and some additions with a net change of $400,000. Now, what you have to understand is some of the impact of that $439,000, where this area is being reduced, are those 2 faculty positions that's in that $439,000, but it'll be an add back over on the academic services side because the salaries will be shifted over to that particular area, which will be the differential between their salaries and the part-time salaries that were there to begin with. So when you look at the impact of this, in these particular areas, this generates about almost $1.4 million. Our target is $3 million. So how do we make up the difference? So far, we've already impacting next year's budget. We have a combination of retirements, resignations, unpaid leaves, and releases of employees across all classification of employees, which nets out to be about $300,000. When I say nets out, because if we have a retirement which requires a replacement, say a full-time faculty retirement which we need to fill the vacated position, then we look at what it would cost us for a part-time replacement for that, and this is a net out. Okay. Another area will be, we've talked a lot about the COPs and the certificates of participation and our debt retirement. We have a large long-term debt. Our payment this year has gone up $500,000 for next year. One of those COPs was used to build the parking lot for the CPAC. We can take parking fee money, which is restricted money, but we can use it to pay off the portion of that COPS used for that parking lot, which relieves the general fund by $80,000. At one point, we were thinking about, can we take that $80,000 and add it on to our payment to drive down the times, like doing a balloon mortgage payment and paying your debt. Well, we found out we can't do that because there's a prepayment penalty that comes with those COPs. So we're trying to be good stewards of our resources also allowed us not that flexibility. So we figured we could then offset some of the costs. We've presented a concept of a faculty retirement incentive program to see if, in fact, we can reduce our costs on the faculty service side through retirements. And so we built into this a goal. This is strictly a goal. It's based on the number of faculty who would actually choose to participate in the incentive program. It's about $45,000 per retirement. So this goal and this target is based on 10 additional full-time faculty who would choose to retire this year. On Thursday, the Management Senate took action on a request that I made. I made the Management Senate to join me and the Vice Presidents in a 5% salary reduction for 12-13. And the Management Senate approved this recommendation, and this will go into effect on July 1st. This is for all unrepresented employees. This is the savings in terms of salary and the employer costs of $278,000 that will be applied to the goal that we have. And then the balance, or what I'm calling the gap, is about $500,000 to reach the $3 million target. And that is open to our conversations that we will be having with the CCFT and CCUE. There is an opportunity in this budget reduction plan for everybody to participate a little bit. What does $500,000 mean? $500,000 mean approximately anywhere from 1% to 3% of the dollars that we're spending in classified service and faculty service at this point. Also, to quantify $500,000, it's about 5 positions in classified service, or about 10 positions in classified service, about 5 positions in management service. So that's the scope of what the impact of $500,000 is. So that generates a 1.6, which then arrives at our $3 million fee, or total. Now, is this hard and fast? No, because there are some cushions in here, and I shouldn't say cushions, but there's some soft projections. What if we only get 8 retirements? What if we only get 2 retirements on the faculty side? What if we can't successfully sit down and negotiate with the unions in regard to a reduction in expenditures in those 2 particular classifications? Then it means that over the next few months before July 1st, we'll have to come back and do other modifications to reach our projected goal. The other thing that I want to mention too is this is all predicated on the fact that there is a successful tax initiative that is passed in November. Right now, a betting person would say there isn't much of a chance at all, given the fact there's multiple messages that are moving towards the ballot. And I think by now in California or in most places, the more choices you give the voters, the more choices they'll take. and therefore lessening the opportunity for any one of those to be successful. So what does it mean if, in fact, the tax initiative is not passed? Well, then we have another mid-year strike. And that strike means that the state would reduce our full-time equivalent student-funded cap by 480 FTES. That's huge. That's like 160 sections of classes. It's about almost $2.2 million. Now, if in fact we had to do that, part of the impact would be offset by the fact that if we scheduled fewer classes, because we would have to look at summer 2013 to reduce the scope of the schedule is where we would reduce. So we'd save about half of that in classes that we would not be paying for, so the faculty salaries in those areas. But we'd still have probably a good $1 million of liability that we had had. That's why it's important to maintain as much of the contingency money that we have. And after this mid-year cut, we'll have about $1 million to work with. That $1 million would be necessary to meet this particular challenge of a mid-year cut for next year. There is a possibility that we could generate another $1 million if our summer session is successful and we do hit our mid-sized college threshold again, which qualifies us for some new dollars. But we haven't put this into the mix yet because that hasn't happened yet. That hasn't happened yet. The tax initiative has not happened yet. But any way you look at it, the $3 million, every time we slice the pie differently, it still comes up with about a $3 million task. One of the things that I wanted to mention, I want to go back a second here because there was an area that I want to talk about, and I think I skipped over this one. So I wanted to put into context why $3 million. For next year, in the governor's budget, the governor's budget is projecting no more cuts for community colleges out the door. But we still have that 2.2 looming in mid-year. But going into this year, we still have some additional costs that we have to account for. We have to account for the changes of cost for goods and services, which we're projecting at about a little over 3%. Looks like a healthy estimate of what is increasing, whether it be fuel, whether it be paper goods, whether it be printing costs, whether it be utilities. There's going to be a change in the cost of doing business. In our structural deficit, the salary adjustment, this is just anybody that moves on the salary schedule, whether it be columns or ranges or steps, anybody who receives qualifications for longevity or professional growth, or you receive stipends for having bilingual capabilities, whether you're receive a stipend for using a cell phone in your line of your work. This is the category where all of this fits into this annual change. This year we're facing an increase, about a 50% increase in our cost payment. This is where it bubbles, and this will be the last big bubble in all of the payments throughout the life of the three COPs. We get a little spike next year, the following year, of $2,000, which is relatively nothing in comparison to this. But this is where the $80,000 I talked about earlier is going to help offset that we don't feel the full impact. And then remember, I said for this year's budget and planning, or the Planning and Budget Committee approved use of contingency money to get us through this year. We got to offset that. We can't rely on using that money again because it's gone. So we have to account for the $1.1 million in our plan. We have to carry forward the triggers that happened in December, that $850,000, because that is gone. And now it becomes part of the reduction. Even though the state didn't cut our budget, they virtually cut it because of all the mid-year stuff that they did that we had to carry forward. And then because we will be a smaller college again, because we need to reduce sections to come into play. We went from an 8,700 to 8,600 full-time equivalent students. The deans and so on have been reducing the class schedule for fall and spring of 12-13 in order to conform to that lesser funded FTES. So there will be some salary savings that we can figure into this. So the bottom line is we're looking at the $2.9 million, and that's what predicated the planning and budget to approve a $3 million target for this year. So let me now go back to the impacts. Okay, so what does it mean? So moving into next year, because our full-time equivalent student target has been reduced again, okay, we'll be unable to accommodate as many as 700 students based on the number of sections we're removing from the schedule, which impacts the number of seats, which impacts the number of choices of whether a student can find seats in the selected areas. It will impact approximately 50 employees, whether they be full-time, management, classified, faculty, or part-time management, classified, or faculty, which is about 5% of our workforce. We have about 1,000 employees working for us in all capacities. There will be district and college units that will be consolidated, restructured, and realigned. Employees' work assignments, schedules, and/or sites could very well be different. Hours of operation will have to be strategically scheduled to look at the services that we provide, when we provide them, and where we provide them. We will all have a responsibility to be aware of the changes taking place around us, because we have to be informed. We have to know who's doing what now, where, and when, so we can articulate the way in which our college operates to each other and to our students and to our visitors and our community members. We'll all need to be very clear with our students and community about when and how services will be provided, because it could be very different. But first and foremost, we will not allow any of these economic distractions to interfere with our accreditation focus. That will not change. We have to remain focused and driven to be in complete conformance and compliance, because that is our future and that is our legacy, is to be an accredited institution. And we must continue to look for ways to help each other, because these are tough times and they will continue to get tougher. And some of us will be hurting. Some of us will be needing a hand. Some of us will be needing a hug. Be there for each other. Be there for me, because I'm going to be there for you. And be sensitive to changes that are going to happen around you, but maybe not changes directly that you have to experience. Be sensitive to that. Be understanding of that. And be grateful for what you have and the opportunities that you're given to perform a service in a very, very important function in society, and that's higher education. We'll talk about next steps in a little while, but we have some dates and things in here that I think are going to be important. I want to address those when we talk about next step. I'll just throw the slide up there and then we'll see. We'll talk about that next one. Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any index cards out there with some questions that we can collect?
There's one question on the North County campus. How is the inflationary deficit projected?
The inflationary deficit of the, what was it, $300,000? $210,000. That was actually produced by my Vice President of Administrative Services, Tony Summer, and I'll let her explain how she came up with that figure.
We applied the inflationary deficit to the 5,000s. The 5,000s is where we normally see it in such in software licenses, other licenses and such. And we used a factor that has been historically verified of 3.528, I think, percent. And it's about $6 million in that budget now. So we just applied the percentage to the line item in the general fund, not to the other funds, to come up with the 210,000. I hear Jack Sullivan laughing. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm a little concerned that the inflationary factor, given with what's happening in gasoline, may in fact be a little low, but at this point we'll see how it works out. But that's how I did it. Any question?
Thank you. That's all from the North County.
Question, how many faculty and staff are being laid off to pay consultants for accreditation, previously a function of administration?
Can you repeat the question?
How many faculty and staff are being laid off to pay consultants for accreditation, previously a function of administration?
Actually, there are no one being laid off for that purpose. We're paying for the cost of accreditation through salary savings in this year, which is one-time only money. That money does not continue to be applied in the subsequent years. So we're not using any continuing resources. We also have a possibility of a private gift support that is, we're in negotiation with who may step forward and pay the full cost.
Any changes in plans for new buildings? Are we cutting people and continuing to build? I did not see any line items for savings of not building.
No, we have, the only building we have approved by the state of California that was in the hopper was a trades and technology building for the North County campus. That project is now in a kind of a very dicey condition. It's still approved. We can still ultimately build that building, but it requires several things. One is, because of the time over which that building has been on the docket, it has to be redesigned under today's building codes. That's a cost of about $250,000 to be able to do that. So that's a cost. If in fact we did that, then the state would have to approve another statewide bond in, I think it's 2013-14. And assuming then that that bond would pass, then money would become available to actually build that building at 100% of the cost with 90% up front, which would not require us to go out and borrow money like we've had in the past. I'm not convinced that's still a good bet for us. We haven't made a final decision on whether we're going to pursue that. We do have a few months in which we will have to say yes or no. Whatever we do, we'll be taking to the Planning and Budget Committee and then to the board in terms of either a recommendation or a statement that we are going to stop pursuing that particular project. The only other place that we've talked about facilities is in the South County, but that's been put on hold. We've explored the concept of renovating commercial property into an instructional facility, and that's not a good plan, because every commercial building that we look at has to meet the Department of State architect requirements, which means it has to be brought up to current code, which means that the construction costs have to be borne at, what do you call it, the prevailing wage, which is increases the cost significantly. it's almost cheaper to tear the building down and then build something from the ground up. So unless we had a different kind of proposal from a property owner and or another project that wanted to piggyback on adding us to their project, we're not going to move in that direction. So currently our plan is to continue to work with Lucia Mar School District and look at property that they have on both of their Nipomo High School and their Rio Grande High School sites, and the possibility of bringing in some modular buildings to create day and evening access, which is really what we need in order to service more people in the South County, in facilities that we can develop and manage and equip to meet our specifications. And of course, our foundation has been adamantly agreed to help support that in terms of the cost of equipping and furnishing those particular buildings. But that's the only thing that we have discussed or have had any idea for doing that. Our biggest challenge right now in terms of facilities is modernizing our current facilities. You know, this campus is no longer the new campus. This is the old campus. And much of the infrastructure of this campus was built and in place before technology ever existed. So we understand that there is a modernization issue and a challenge that we have.
Okay, the next two questions are very similar, so I'm putting them together. Why isn't the retirement incentive plan to include classified instead of being limited to faculty? And why is there never a classified incentive? Classified package could retire long-term classified by keeping them more classified employees employed.
It's a good question. You know, every time that we have put together, in my understanding, my history, a classified or management incentive plan, there's just not enough people. And the difference between a starting salary for a classified employee and the top end is very narrow. The same thing with management. So unless it saves money and significant money, it's not a good idea. This isn't a strategy to make people happy. This is a strategy to save money. That's the only purpose for which any district or entity offers a retirement incentive program. Back in 2004, there was an incentive plan put forth for all groups. It saved very little money because everybody was allowed to weigh in. Classified, management, faculty. I was a beneficiary of that program. And nobody saved any money on my taking it. Actually, it cost money. So that's why last year we broke it out into 2 years ago, we broke it out into 3 separate groups. And each group had to show by the number of individuals and the calculations done for those individual employees whether or not it would achieve the threshold that was established in order to qualify. And the faculty group, it did, and the classified and management group, it didn't. We didn't get enough people to show that it would actually, the savings would offset the cost of the annuity or whatever payout for the incentive.
Where is management's contribution accomplished with much fewer numbers lost? I'm just reading the question.
Okay. All right, in our budget reduction plan, obviously see that there's a 5% contribution. That's a voluntary contribution. In the restructuring of the program, there's about a 10% reduction of management positions in the budget reduction plan. That'll be much larger than any other group.
When will classified staff, CCCUE, be given a layoff list?
I communicated with John Fetcho yesterday. Was it yesterday, John, I believe? We exchanged emails.
Yes, we did.
Because you asked that same question. Yeah. The question is, when would we start that conversation? Well, that won't happen until I have an opportunity to meet with Planning and Budget a week from today. Is that still on the board up there? Yeah. The next critical date is March 20th, which I will be talking to the Planning and Budget Committee and asking for their endorsement of the budget reduction plan. After we have some robust conversations, I'll have the opportunity to share in a little bit more detail, more intimate detail, some of the underlying elements of the budget reduction plan. And as soon as that particular meeting is completed, and as I've told John, that I will meet with the union because we'll have to set up a schedule of union representation for the meetings that I would have with any affected employees. I'll also start the meetings that I have with management members who would be impacted. And we've already had meetings with faculty members who were impacted because that had to happen before the March 7th board meeting.
You've answered this question, but in order not to miss any questions, I'm going to ask it anyway. When and how will we find out about our jobs reductions, reorganization? And another question, when will you start notifying employees of layoffs, and what do you expect to complete with the notification?
Thank you. The contact will happen between March 21st and March 27th. Because I will be going to the Board of Trustees for the April 4th meeting with the budget reduction plan and the resolutions that are required of that plan for the board to take action.
There's a question Linda's going to answer.
The 160 sections of classes estimated as $2.2 million in revenue. How many students will qualify for tuition reduction?
I have no clue. You know, that'll be, that's really a state of, since the fees will not change, you know, the new $46 unit fee goes into effect this summer. And so the earliest that the impact would have would be for summer 2013. In 12-13, we're not sure what the impact of the new fee will have. I'm sure more students will qualify for the Board of Governors fee waiver. All of our statewide organizations are advocating with the legislature to, get a clue, build that into the budget projections, because we don't want to be continuously hit with a mid-year underestimating of the collection of fees. Just ask the field, and they can give you an idea of what the changes are on a year-over-year basis. But I couldn't give a number or even predict what that would be. I don't know if anyone in student services could right now.
How much do we owe in the COPS loan, and how much will it actually cost after interest, all the interests are paid?
Really a lot. And I'm not kidding. You all have, many of you have mortgages, and you look at how much interest you pay every year. The only time that is of any benefit is when you do your taxes. You say, thank God for the deduction I have. And then you think, I'm sure paying a heck of a lot of money beyond the sticker price. It's the same thing that happens in a long-term, this is a long-term loan, and Tony has more specifics on that I can ask her to repeat. And I'm not sure what you talk about it, Tony, about the size of the debt, how long it's been there. These are things that happen starting back in 1996, and several of those have been refinanced when interest rates got better, and we leveraged those. The new COPS came in when buildings came online or in the construction stages. But we have what we have. We can't change that. We can't make it go away. There's been discussion about, well, why don't we just pass a bond and pay off the debt? Well, bonds have to have more in them, more attractive, more compelling reasons than paying off a debt. We've done some bond studies so far. We talked to bond consultants about this county and its voting record and its pocketed political messaging, and this is not a good time for a bond. Plus, there isn't, and I'm not convinced that we have a good public image out there in terms of who we are, what we're doing, and whether we're all on the same page. You know, when we have letters to the editor and we have articles in the paper of all different kinds of things, it's confusing. It's confusing to my wife. It's confusing to my neighbor. It's confusing to people who want to make sure they want Cuesta to be successful, but they're not sure about whether or not they're a good investment right now. So we can do better than this, and we can position ourselves, and we can strategize in terms of how do we best use the ways in which you can put bonds on the ballot. You don't have to put one bond in for the whole district. You can do bond sections or bond districts, and we can do a bond for South County. We can do a bond for North County. We can do a bond for modernizing this campus. And the electorate in that area is the one who votes on that. And that could be a more successful strategy, knowing the voting history of this county and the conservative nature of this county. But back to the question about the long-term debt, yes, we'll look at every opportunity and advantage we can to drive down our indebtedness. And part of that is our regular visiting of whether or not we can leverage to get lower interest rates. And we've been doing that on an annual basis as part of our budget development plan. Tony?
I wasn't prepared for this question, so I apologize. I'm going to dangerously make some estimates with the ability. Oh, here do we have? Oh, thank you. Basically, we have 3 COPs. We actually have 4, but there's actually 3 loans. One loan was borrowed to actually pay for the building that we're all sitting in right now. It's been refinanced a number of times. In fact, that COPS loan, in fact, has a contribution from the associated students and the bookstore of about $80,000 to $85,000 a piece per year to help make that payment. But that is an example of how in the past, in trying to get better interest rates, that COP still exists because it's been refinanced a number of times. The 2006 COP was used for the North County campus, as well as some other things, the library addition, reconstruction projects, banner, those type of things were paid with that particular bond. The third bond that was taken out to help complete the CPAC, as well as to pay for a mandated sewer project. And it was determined it was better to borrow money than to hit the general fund. That's when we started getting the cuts to our budget, as well as that parking lot that was required, which is why we're able to use parking fees to pay that back. There's a Series A and a Series B in that particular COP. And the Series A was to provide the cash flow to build the LRC, meaning that the time between we had to pay our contractors and actually being reimbursed by the state. A big payment will be made in November. That part of the COPS will actually be paid in full in November with the final payment from the state for the LRC. The remaining bond was, the remaining COP, was used to actually, for the CPAC, the sewer, and the parking lot. I do not have the interest rates on those, unfortunately, with me. I was not prepared for this question. And if you have further questions about the COPS, I'm happy to answer them.
Can you just clarify the year of the last one you talked about relative to the CPAC parking lot?
2009.
Thanks.
Regarding the faculty retirement incentive, when will it be offered and for what time frame?
I'm assuming that if it will go as part of the package, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Stark, of the budget reduction plan to the board on April 4th, if they in fact approve the plan, which includes the retirement incentive, when we will give the details, obviously, to the board to approve the retirement incentive as well. It will be then offered on April 5th.
Yeah, and we are in conversation with CCFT to look at some of the details of the implementation of that so we can be as more inclusive than exclusive.
Can you provide more details about the items called, quote, additions? For example, what are the projected costs? Thank you.
Well, as we've said before, and I've said this consistently since I came back to Cuesta College, and that is that it's about making adjustments where adjustments be needed. In other words, we are now in a society and a world of technology. Do we have the right balance of staff in computer services and our tech in order to be able to support the level of technology that we have? So part of what we have to take a look at is, will we be making reductions across the board in some areas and yet find a need to add a new position in an area in which we're understaffed and unable to provide the support that we sorely need in today's world of how we deliver services and how we deliver information, how we deliver classes?
A question just came forward, and it relates to the question on the COPS, so we'll just put it into the mix. How much is the COPS debt? 10 million, 30 million?
I'm looking at, I've actually written this stuff down rather than memorize it. The 2003 COPS, the amount borrowed was 3.3 million. It is currently slightly over 2 million. The 2006 COPS, the original amount, it was almost 13 million. It's just above 12 million. The Series A was 17.6 million. That's the one that will be paid off in November. And the Series B was 7.3 million, and we have made no payments on principal. That's why we have the balloon next year, because we had a couple years interest-free. We were hoping that would get us through this economic crisis. Obviously, that's not been the case. So 7 plus 17 is 24, 36, 38, but 17 of the 38, 17 will be paid in November. Does the district pay for the salaries of the administrative staff of community programs?
No.
Why is the district considering South County expansion during a time when we are reducing FTS? Won't this have an impact on student success?
It certainly will. It'll give more students an opportunity to be successful that need it.
If a department gets notice of a position being cut, will other employees have an opportunity to take a cut to help save a position?
Possibly. We'll be working with both of our unions to talk about and negotiate the effects of layoffs. I realize, I think it was in 2009 that CCCUE stepped up and approved a salary reduction across the board in order to keep some positions from being either reduced or eliminated. You have to understand that when I'm looking at the budget reduction, we're talking about a structural change. And a structural change does not mean a short-term fix necessarily. So I have no guarantee that the state of California is going to miraculously turn around and suddenly give us a COLA and growth in an abundance where we can cover our annual structural deficit or inflationary deficit in order for us to actually build back and support the structure that we need in order to support the students that we serve. So if you saw and you paid attention to the reduction plan, this conversation that we'll be having with both unions is not about saving positions. It's about meeting a $3 million shortfall.
Will you be meeting with part-time faculty who are impacted?
It could possibly be. A lot of times that we don't know that for probably a while to know what the fallout is. A lot of that is related to the schedule. The schedule is being built it's not part of the budget reduction plan. It's really part of the ability to schedule classes within the funded level. It's really a function of the academic affairs and the deans and the division chairs and the vice president who work with the assignments and dealing with the faculty. I have no problem in meeting with any employee because if you know, I take it very personally I take a very personal interest in the fact that if somebody is going to have a reduction in their job or they're going to lose their job, I'm going to be the one that shares the news with them and deal with their opportunities or options they have in possibly being reassigned or bumping into a position that they have entitlement to. The messaging to part-time faculty who are impacted in equally as devastating ways is not to assume that just because somebody is part-time, it's not a critical part of their livelihood and their professional experience. So we don't want to lessen the impact on them, but it's also logistically a little bit more difficult to deal with that population in a time frame in which they may not really be aware until later on.
Are there any more questions? North County? Dr. Stork, that's the end of our questions.
Thank you. So I talked a little bit about the March 20th. We have a planning meeting in which I'm going to come back to planning and budget. We'll have more discussion over the presentation today, the information that has been shared, the questions that are being developed or being presented, both individuals that are here and those who have been invited to provide input who are not here. And to talk in more detail with planning and budget so they have a better and a clearer understanding of what some of the general comments that I made in terms of what reorganization means and what it might look like and what the details are. But you also have to understand, I have to be very careful because I don't want to walk into a situation in which I start sharing information and it impacts somebody that's either in the room or directly related to somebody in the room and they hear about it not directly from me. I will not do that. And so when I say I cannot share that information with you, then I want you to understand it's not because I don't want to share the information with you, it's I don't want to undermine somebody else's relationship with a college and their right to know directly rather than indirectly. So it's a really delicate and very dicey kind of process, and I want to manage that well and respectfully. So I ask for your understanding of that, and I'll be asking the Planning and Budget Committee to be understanding about what I can share and what I can't share in the process. So what happens then is I will be taking the budget reduction plan to the April 4th board meeting. And at that meeting, I'll be asking the board to approve the elements of the budget reduction plan that are in a position to be approved. You notice there are some things that are evolving and will be evolving through the spring semester. On April 6th is another scheduled President's Open Forum. I'll be discussing in the open forum kind of the content of that board meeting, the content of the action that they took on and what it means. And then on May 2nd, This will be an opportunity for us to bring back additional actions for the board to consider as part of the budget reduction plan. At the April 4th meeting, I'm going to be asking the board to approve resolutions which will activate the layoff process and the timeline for that. If you understand that for faculty, permanent faculty, the requirement is they be notified by March 15th. That's happened. And there were 2 faculty involved in that. For classified and also for academic managers would have to be notified by March 15th. For classified employees and classified managers, there's a 45-day notification period. So the individuals would have to be notified no later than the middle of May in order to meet the 45-day requirement and still be within this year. So we have more time built into the schedule, so it's a minimum of 45 days. So we'll have more time in order to notify people, to have more time to make adjustments and plans, and for us to sort out all of the other opportunities. There will be some people who will have bumping rights, and they may bump somebody who has bumping rights somewhere else. And so there is this kind of adjustment period that we would have to go through. It also gives us opportunities based on any changes of information, change of circumstances, changes in the projected budget predictions to make adjustments at the May 2nd board meeting. And then we want to be bringing to the board in June the tentative budget for 12-13. And the board takes action on the tentative budget. They also have their budget workshop during that time. And that is in preparation, and the purpose of the tentative budget is so that we can write checks on July 1st. If the board doesn't approve a tentative budget, then we cannot expend any, we can't do payroll, we can't purchase any goods and services at that point. The final budget isn't approved until the September board meeting. And we're hoping that the state legislature, as they did last year, will take action and approve a state budget on time, so we don't have to start a fiscal year without knowing what's going to happen. And I hope, State Controller John Chang is true to his word, and he withhold payment of legislators if they don't, get past the budget. He was true to his word last year, and it paid off because the legislature paid attention to it. So that's in terms of the protocol and the steps that we'll be taking over the next few months in terms of how this rolls out and how it's implemented. Okay? That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Stork. So that concludes our public forum for today. And the timeline for when we'll be getting back together. Thank you for coming.